The air thickened with the metallic scent of old blood and damp earth clinging to the back of my throat. A sticky, cold moisture coated the spines of volumes that weren't meant to be read by the living. Every whisper from the shelves wasn't a story being told, but a name being added to a list. My fingers traced not titles, but dates, each one a final expiration, etched into the leather by an unseen hand. The silence here wasn't empty. It was a held breath, a collective pause from things that watched from the dark spaces between worlds, and the worst realization dawned, cold and absolute. We weren't borrowing books. We were being checked out. We were reading our own obituaries. My name is Sarah Reed. The scent of aged leather and damp paper filled the air as my fingers traced the embossed cover. The pages felt cold and heavy, like they held more than just ink and paper. 3 days back, I borrowed a book. The librarian said I was an ideal candidate. What she omitted was that membership requires you to be deceased. Sarah. It started the week after the funeral. My grandfather, Arthur, he was a historian, a collector of strange things. Sorting through his estate was a brutal, exhausting chore, but in a box of his forgotten things, my fingers brushed against something unexpected. I found a library card, not plastic, vellum. The ink had faded to a ghostly gray, but the address remained starkly visible. 22, Obsidian Lane. Stamped across it in bold, unyielding letters were the words, "The Final Chapter Library." I'd spent my entire life in Chicago and had never heard of such a place. Yet when I searched it, Google Maps showed nothing but an empty, silent lot. But that night, walking home from Mark's place, I took a wrong turn. A thick, sudden fog rolled in off the lake, swallowing the familiar landmarks. And there it was, squeezed between a condemned parking garage and a shuttered nail salon. The structure seemed to materialize from the mist, a silent sentinel in the unnatural quiet. A single, green glass lantern glowed with a sickly light above a black door. The air smelled of ozone and old paper, and the shadows felt damp against the skin. A low, electrical hum vibrated through the stone, and something whispered from within the keyhole. Curiosity killed the cat, but it got me a library card. Sarah pushed the heavy door open. The interior was vast, an impossible geometry that swallowed the building's true dimensions. The air grew thick, a cloying cocktail of decaying paper, ancient leather bindings, and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. It was the scent of a place that had just witnessed a violent, silent storm. In the sepulchral quiet of the archive, Miss Abernathy presided from her monolithic desk. Her skin was parchment-pale, her spectacles balanced on a sharp nose. A thin, mirthless smile failed to touch her distant eyes. Without glancing up from the ledger before her, her voice, dry as dust, cut the stillness. Sarah Reed. We've been expecting you. The Arthur Reed collection is in order. Sarah. How did you... I have his card. Miss Abernathy accepted the card, her fingers frigid against its surface. A legacy membership, she noted, her voice dropping to a whisper. How fortunate, she breathed, the words hanging in the still air. The rules, she continued, are simple. He wandered the shadowed stacks, his fingers trailing across leather spines and brittle pages. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper, ozone, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. Then, a single volume seemed to pulse on the shelf, its cover shifting as if breathing. A primal understanding settled over him. This book was waiting. It had chosen him. Sarah wandered the labyrinth, her gaze drawn to the eerie titles lining the shelves. The unheard symphonies of drowned men, a catalog of lost shadows. The air grew heavy with the scent of aged paper and something faintly metallic, like old iron. Then, a book at eye level seemed to shift on its shelf, its spine utterly blank. A primal dread took hold, her breath catching in her throat as the silence thickened around her. On impulse, she pulls the book. The title embosses itself in gold as her fingers make contact. Sarah Reed, Volume 1. Sarah. My heart seized. The cover was warm, like living flesh. My hands trembled, but a compulsion deeper than fear forced me to carry it to the desk. Miss Abernathy smiled, and this time, it was genuine. An autobiography, our most popular genre. A fascinating read, I'm told. You are a perfect candidate. The air in the room grew dense, thick, with the scent of old paper and something metallic, like cold iron. A low, electrical hum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that made the teeth ache. The words on the page began to darken, not with ink, but as if absorbing the very light from the room. Miss Abernathy stamped a due date in the front of the book, her movements mechanical and final. The date, stark and undeniable, was for tomorrow. Later, back in her well-lit apartment, the book sat on her table, looking deceptively ordinary. With a breath that felt too loud in the quiet room, Sarah reached out and opened it. The pages were filled with her own handwriting, yet Sarah had never written these words. As she read aloud, Chapter 7, The Grief, her voice trembled slightly. The weeks following Grandfather Arthur's passing were a gray haze, the only clarity being that strange library card, a final puzzle from a man who adored them. The air grew heavy with the scent of old paper and dust. She turned the pages, her own life unfolding before her eyes. Every mundane moment was documented there, culminating in her walk to the library that very evening. Her own voice narrated back to her in a haunted whisper, each word a violation of her privacy. A sick, gravitational pull drew her deeper into the text for hours, the musty scent of old paper and ink filling her senses. My fingers traced the final words, the ink still seeming wet on the page. It described me, right then, sitting on my couch, reading this very book. The last sentence was a command. She closed the book, her hands trembling, and decided to call Mark. The air in the room grew thin, tasting of dust and old paper. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing against my ears. Without thinking, I slammed the book shut, the sound a sharp crack in the quiet. My gaze fell to my phone, sitting dark and silent on the coffee table. A cold, metallic dread settled in my stomach. The decision wasn't mine anymore. The page had already written it. Mark. Hey, you. Weird, I was just thinking about you. You okay? You sound spooked. Sarah's skin prickled with gooseflesh. She hadn't mentioned being unnerved. Her voiceover cut through the heavy silence. Mark, what were you thinking about me? Exactly. Mark's reply was a low, measured whisper from the dark. Just that dream you told me about last week. The one with the library and the endless stairs. Creepy, right? The book sat open on the desk, its pages damp to the touch, smelling faintly of ozone and old paper. Sarah never told him about that dream. She had it just last night. The air in the room grew heavy. The only sound was soft, rhythmic scratching from somewhere unseen. The impossible truth settled in. The book was writing the future. Her hands trembled as she flipped past the last entry, finding only blank pages. Then, right before her eyes, fresh ink began to curl and bloom across the pristine paper. The words materialized into a chilling sentence. She told Mark she was fine. Another line followed immediately. A lie. Her eyes drifted to the window. On the street below, a figure stood motionless beneath the flickering lamp, its gaze fixed upward. The damp, metallic scent of ozone filled the air, prickling the skin. Sarah ran to the window, her movements frantic, and wrenched the blind aside. A low, rhythmic scratching began from somewhere outside, a sound that froze her breath in her throat. There, beneath the street lamp's sickly glow, stood a towering silhouette, its features swallowed by shadow as it stared directly up at her. The following 24 hours unfolded as a relentless montage of escalating horror. The book updated ceaselessly, its pages now whispering her own frantic thoughts back to her in a metallic, ozone-tinged voice. In a final, desperate act, she tried to destroy it. The flames licked but refused to catch. The blade slid across the cover, leaving not a scratch, as if cutting through stone. Sarah returned to 22 Obsidian Lane, but the address was now just a vacant, silent lot. The figure grew bolder, appearing in her apartment lobby, then at the grocery store's end cap, its reflection warped in her microwave's dark glass. Mark dismissed her escalating terror as a mental collapse, his concern tinged with doubt. Desperate, Sarah dug deeper online and unearthed a years-old forum post that read, "Final chapter library equals purgatory checkout. You read your life as it unfolds, page by page, until the due date arrives, and then they come to collect. Tonight is that due date." Sarah's voiceover cuts through the stillness, her tone hollow with realization. It wasn't a lending library. It was a processing center. The books weren't stories. They were files. The patrons, we were the recently deceased, poring over our own case files, reading ourselves into acceptance before moving on. Grandfather Arthur must have died there. He left me his card as a warning or an invitation. The clock read 11:57 p.m., 3 minutes until the due date. Sarah's apartment was swallowed by darkness. The only light, a faint amber street lamp bleeding through the blinds. She held the book in her lap, its leather cover cool and slightly damp to the touch. A faint, metallic scent of ozone hung in the still air as the final seconds began to slip away. The final entry was complete. She waited in the dark, the book heavy in her lap. The lock on her front door began to turn with a slow, deliberate scrape of metal. A sharp metallic click echoed in the stillness, followed by the groan of hinges. The tall figure from the street filled the doorway, then stepped into the faint light, its form casting a long, distorted shadow across the floor. Miss Abernathy stood there, holding a silver date stamp. Her voice was unnervingly calm, like a librarian at midnight. A metallic scent, like ozone and old coins, hung in the air. "Good evening, Sarah," she said, the words precise and cold. The moment arrived, inevitable as the moon's pull on the tide. Her payment was due. A metallic scent, like old pennies and ozone, choked the still air around her. Her voice was a raw, fractured whisper, scraping against the silence as she thrust the book forward. "I'm not dead," she gasped. The words, a desperate incantation. "I'm alive!" I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every ragged breath a struggle. Miss Abernathy took the book, her touch freezing the skin on Sarah's wrist like dry ice. Then she spoke, her voice carrying the scent of ozone and cold metal. "The accident on the Lakeshore Drive overpass, the black ice, the jackknife truck. 1 week ago, you never made it to your grandfather's estate sale. You've been in transition. This library helps souls like yours acclimate. The air here carries the scent of ancient paper and cold, forgotten stone. To read your life is to understand your death. It prevents messy denials. Then came the flashbacks. Quick, brutal cuts she'd never experienced before. The air filled with the scent of ozone and burnt rubber. A metallic taste coating her tongue. Memories Sarah didn't have until now. Memories that weren't hers to keep. With a final, resonant thud, Abernathy stamped the book, his voice hollow and procedural. "Return. Process complete. Come along, dear," he intoned, his words carrying the scent of aged paper and something faintly metallic. "The next reader is waiting for your volume." This marked the conclusion, a finality that left the air heavy and still, as if the very library held its breath. Abernathy turned to leave, and Sarah, numb, followed her into the hallway. But it wasn't her apartment corridor. The air smelled of old paper and dust, and the oppressive quiet pressed in from all sides. She spun around, a jolt of panic seizing her. The door behind her was simply gone. Abernathy slid. Sarah Reed. Volume 1. Back onto the shelf, its spine disappearing into the endless, shadowy expanse. She gestured vaguely into the library's oppressive gloom, a gesture that felt swallowed by the sheer scale of the place. "You may browse the open stacks while your paperwork is finalized," her voice echoed, flat and final. "Perhaps you'd like to read about Mark?" The question hung in the stale, paper dust air. Notice his mourning, or your parents? Their tales all converge here. Every narrative reaches its terminus in this place. The air here is thick, with the scent of aged paper and something metallic, like old iron, a distant, rhythmic scratching echoes, as if stories themselves are being etched into the walls. Sarah stood isolated in the library's endless quiet. Her hand trembled as she extended it. Across the aisle, a single book shuddered and slid toward her of its own accord. She pulled it down, her eyes fixing on the spine's embossed title, Mark Davies. The ink on the page glistened, still damp, as if the words had just been written. It described Mark waking, his face slick with tears, and a certainty that Sarah was gone forever, a realization that hollowed him out. Sarah looked up from the book, the scent of old paper and something metallic hanging in the air. Deep in the shadowed stacks, faint, translucent figures stood motionless among the shelves. A solitary man reads in a shadowed corner, while a young girl weeps over an open volume. All are bathed in the library's eternal, sickly green glow. Sarah's broken whisper cuts through the stagnant air. The library only lends books to the dead. But we don't just read our stories. We become footnotes in everyone else's story, trapped here until the living forget us. The camera slowly pulls back, revealing her shrinking form against the vast, oppressive architecture. Then we cut to the final image. Her grandfather's library card resting on his sunlit desk in the real world. The air in the library carries the scent of old paper and something deeper, like cold, dry earth. Then, a sudden gust from the open window carried it gently into the wastebasket, where it settled with finality. The haunting cello note returned, swelling for a moment before dissolving into a profound stillness. The screen faded to an absolute black, thick and consuming. From the void, stark white text materialized in a simple, elegant font, posing a chilling question.